Well, friends, thank you so much for being here. I am so grateful to have you, Josh, and David and Don participating in this conversation. You know, David, the reality is that states are going to have different orders and different speeds of lifting mandates and gathering large groups. We're seeing a lot of information about that right now. And so with this being the case, I'm wondering what, from your perspective, what are some questions that leaders can begin to ask that will help them understand possible modifications that would work for the families they serve?
Right. I mean, we really are. We're all in one way in different boats, and in other ways, we're all very much in the same boat. I mean, I know I'm in St. Louis, Missouri, and where we're at, the governor is starting to open things up. We're going to be going back to quasi-normal here very soon. But you hop right across the Mississippi River in Illinois, where you're at, Michaela, and it's a very different story. I mean, it could be until Jesus comes back that the quarantine is over. So, I mean, and we're talking Illinois, that's like 20 miles from my house. It's that different just right across the border. So it really is. It's different for all of us, but in some ways, it's very much the same. And first of all, you know, one of the things I want to point out in terms of the sameness for all of us is that when all of this happened at first, I mean, I felt like this was just a huge obstacle to ministry. I mean, the ministry that we're doing, the content that we're creating, it's almost like everything came to a screeching, crashing halt. And there was probably maybe a half a day or a full day where I was just almost like in this sort of a funk or a depression of like, what in the world? What are we going to do? How are we going to even survive all of this? But after about one day, I really think it was the Holy Spirit that just convicted me and changed my attitude towards the whole thing. And I stopped seeing this as an obstacle, and I started seeing it as an opportunity. And I truly believe that that's what it is, especially because, you know, in children's ministry, we've been talking now for forever about how ultimately it is the parents' call. It's the parents' responsibility to lead their kids spiritually. And we point parents back to Deuteronomy 6:6 over and over and over again. And honestly, I feel like this pandemic has really kind of called us all out. And it has shown, I think, all of us, and especially me, that I've been saying that, but I haven't really been living that way. And I think we all got called out because suddenly it wasn't an option for us in children's ministry to be the spiritual leaders. Suddenly, we're all scrambling to figure out how do we equip and empower the parents at home. And so I almost see this as an opportunity to say, no, seriously, parents, seriously, resource providers, we have got to put some actions to those words. We have to figure out how do we support and equip the parents to do it. Because right now we don't have an option. Right now, that's the only way that we're going to do this is to empower and to equip the parents. And so I hope that we're all kind of experimenting right now and discovering new things. And I honestly, I feel like we're discovering and trying new things that when this pandemic is over, we're not going to go back to the way things were. We're going to keep on trying these new things. And so I hope that everyone who's listening to this, all the children's ministry leaders, you're using this as kind of a laboratory, a testing ground to try out these new things. And the number one question I think that you have to be asking yourself in trying to figure out how to modify what you're doing is you have to ask yourself, what do families have an appetite and capacity for right now? And I think it's a little bit different depending on, you know, whether you're asking the kids or whether you're asking the parents. For parents, I would say that if you're going to modify what you're doing and you're going to send it home, which I love that idea. I love the idea of sending VBSs home. But if you think that you can just take the VBS and the way that you were doing VBS at church and hand that to the parents to do at home, you're crazy. I mean, everyone knows just how overwhelmingly difficult it is to pull a VBS off at church. And so I don't think any of us can just take that VBS, hand it to the parents and say, here, do this at home. It's not going to happen. I mean, I know firsthand as a parent of 3 kids, how hard it is right now to lead kids through school and balance that with work. So whatever you do, it has to be so easy and turnkey for the parents. But then you also have to ask the question, what do kids have an appetite for right now? And I mean, it's different from kid to kid and probably from region to region, but kind of what I'm sensing from families right now is that there's a little bit of fatigue with virtual. There's a little bit of a fatigue with Zoom, a little bit fatigue with online. You could ask any teacher right now, how are they doing at getting all of their students to show up to their Zoom class meetings? And every teacher I've talked to has said, I'm getting like 2 kids in my entire class who are showing up, or 3 kids. And I think it's only going to get more difficult as time goes and we get deeper into the summer and the nice weather, where a totally virtual experience is going to be hard to draw kids to. And so for that reason, I think that churches need to be looking at creating sort of live interactive experiences for kids to do at home. But you have to find that balance. It has to be easy enough for the parents to be able to lead. And so one of the things that I suggest for a lot of families, or one of the things that we're actually working on right now, is creating an experience where, like, it's video driven, it's video led. It's one video, you press play, and then periodically you hit pause, and then kids and families go and do something. But the video is telling them what to do. So ultimately, the video is the leader, but the parents are the facilitator. And so that way you kind of have the best of both worlds. There's a little bit of virtual in there. You've got a video-driven, video-led thing, but the kids are doing things. They're interacting, they're experiencing something, and it's so easy and turnkey for the families. So it really is kind of a matter of finding the balance between both of those things.
So the questions that leaders need to begin to ask has to do really with number one, what's happening in their state, but number two, what's happening with their parents and their kids. And that drives their decision-making around modification.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you're right. It has to do with what's the state and local government going to tell you to do, and then what's your church leadership going to tell you to do, which is probably for most churches going to be in lockstep with what the state and local authorities are saying.
Right.
But beyond that, I think the most important question is to ask, what do the families want? What do they have the capacity for right now? Because the state and the church leadership can say, thumbs up, you can, in fact, you can have a live VBS if you want. But then the question becomes are the parents going to want to send their kids to a live VBS? And how many other kids are they going to want their kid to be around?
And do they want to roll the dice of opening up for the very first time around a really, really, really big and important event? That's another thing that I've talked to leaders about.
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah.
So your very first opening, you want that to be one of your premier annual events? I don't want to roll those dice.
Yeah.
I don't want to have that experience. I would rather kind of test the waters before I open it up to 300 and some odd kids. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Josh, for leaders who make that decision to do VBS virtually or as a parent-led experience, they're in a state where gathering isn't an option. Their parents have communicated that what their preferences are and what they're wanting to engage in. But for the leader who says, hey, you know what, the why behind VBS for us is all about outreach and inviting kids from our community to participate and really building up that relationship with our community, people who, the non-church kids. What does that mean for them? How can they accomplish outreach within this kind of a model?
I would say that a lot of churches over the years have been the blessed recipients of what we called at church the drop-off kids. And so these are families, and I know a lot of people can get dicey about that, and they're like, hey, we're not free childcare.
Sure.
And they go to different VBSs. And there's a discussion to have there. However, let's envision that those families have frequented, they've been a frequent flyer at your VBS, and you have at least the beginnings of a relationship with them. What would it look like to have invited access to their very own home? Now, can that family actually take a next step? Because you've developed trust with them over the years. And what might it look like to have that type of influence and experience? Now, another thing that I want to point out, there was a lady who is moving in this direction, and she said, we are limited by 340 kids that can come to our VBS. And she said, that is our cap. We have actually a list of kids who can't make it in this particular year because it's just such a machine and a monster that their structure and the size of their church and their building and facility limited that opportunity. So I was on a call with her, and like her eyes lit up, and she said, an at-home thing is actually limitless. She said, would it be okay if we were to kind of grab onto multiple licenses and truly open this up and put up a billboard like we would for any other VBS, and put up when people drive by, and could we send out a Facebook thing and have any and everybody do this? My pastor wants to open up the floodgates. Now that's thinking and reimagining, in a sense, an outreach in kind of a unique context. Now, another thing to think about from an outreach standpoint, let's say that this may be the first year where a backyard Bible club could be the floating softball of all time, right? Because you can't have 50 kids. Maybe it's restricted to 10. We can do that, right? And it's cool enough. It's at home. There's, as David was saying, there's interactive pieces, right? Where there's a play and a pause, and there's movement and action. So it is maybe tech driven, but it's still human centric.
Yeah.
And so I would say, maybe have you earned the right to have invited access into some of these families' homes, and have you earned the right over all of these years to have it happen in a more intimate, family-based context? And so I have to say, I don't have a framework to do nothing. And I'm not calling anyone out. In other words, we all live under some authority structure, whether it's the government or whether it's our senior pastor. I understand that. But me personally, I don't have a framework to do nothing this summer. 3 months of nothing, that's a momentum destroyer. And so let's get our head around the idea. This is not going to be the summer where you have 340 singing kids in your church. You are not going to have 29 of your biggest, brightest, most key volunteers, and the energy that comes with that. There is a loss there, and that cannot be recaptured likely. However, that doesn't mean that it's all for naught. I think that there is a position and an opportunity for us to reimagine something.
Yeah, that's good. Don, I'm mindful as we've had such a hope-filled conversation today that there are some leaders watching who this has been very hard to listen to. They've been told they have to cancel VBS and other events, or feel that coming, feel it imminently. So for leaders today who are watching that are feeling that discouragement about wanting to reimagine what VBS looks like this summer, but feeling like that's not a possibility for them, what wisdom would you offer them, and how would you encourage them to proceed in a healthy and clear way from here?
Yeah, I get the sad trombone music, right? With the wah wah. Well, I think I would start by addressing that by starting with the good news that we are all beloved children of God, whose worth does not depend on whether we do VBS or not, right? God's love for us defines who we are, and not the success or cancellation of our programs. And I also want to point out that even though your program might be canceled for the summer, whether that's VBS or I know there's a lot of camps, outdoor ministries, mission trips that have had to be canceled as well, that can be very difficult. But your passion and love for those kids and families is not canceled, right? And God is equipping us in new and creative ways that otherwise wouldn't have happened, so that when we look at the disappointment, we can start with that good news of who we are as God's beloved children. That being said, I don't want to deny that it can be extremely disappointing to get that decision where you find out, no, we're not doing this thing, that you've already spent time, you've already spent the dollars of the church, right? Purchasing materials and supplies. You've worked with volunteers. And so there is that feeling that I think is really different than other types of disappointments. We don't have a model for what happens during a pandemic. So a lot of these reactions we're having are different. We haven't felt them before. And I think paired with that, for at least some people in ministry, is this underlying uncertainty about our work, right? And whether church budgets will continue to support staff positions. So there's a lot tied up into this decision of we're going to cancel this summer ministry that you've been planning for months and months and months already. So that being said, I just want to remind everybody that this might be a good time to just take a quick mental health check and see how you're doing and see how you're feeling. And we bear so many burdens. We carry so much with us as children's ministry leaders anyway, because we know those stories of those kids and families, and we have a big job. Yeah. And so if anyone who is listening to this right now, who has sort of been thinking, I think I might need some help with this, it is okay to reach out and ask for that help. And there are lots of people who can help you with that. So I do want to mention that to people who are watching and listening to this, that this might be one of those things where the decision comes and you just find that you're just crushed by it. And I also want to point out that it is okay to lament this loss, but that I would encourage you to find a safe, private place to do that. I'm part of a group of mothers who are ministry leaders, and what someone posted one day, let's just lament for the things that we're missing. We're missing that vacation. We're missing seeing our high school senior graduate. We're missing the things that we had planned. It is perfectly appropriate for you to go to a place you know is safe and just lament and say, I have already spent 100 hours planning this VBS and now we're not doing it. Right? I have already made so many of the crafts or the decorations. Whatever that lament is, I would encourage you to find a safe place to lament that and sit with your friends that you're lamenting with, and you can hold some of their sorrows and they will hold yours, so that you have a place to just cry out and say, I'm so sad this happened. Yeah. And I think that's really important as part of our process of grieving the loss of one type of ministry. I have loved hearing the creative ideas of how summer ministry could look different. And I think there's lots of possibilities there. But I do want to encourage people to lament the loss and acknowledge that those can be really hard feelings to have. And then I would say in sitting with that grief and letting that go, as you think about what's next, as you think about the fact that God is always equipping us to serve these kids and these families, really find in your study of scripture and in your devotional life, what is going to be your sort of theological foundation for what's next? Good. And for me, I've been looking a lot at the text about what does it mean to be a good neighbor? What does it mean to care for the least of these? And having those inform how I'm looking ahead to what ministry looks like in the work that I do in publishing. So I think acknowledging those low lows is really important. And we encourage kids to do that, right? We don't just ask for their highs, we ask for their highs and their lows. That's right. And then figuring out, how do we root ourselves in a theological understanding of what our next steps are going to be, so that they are informed by scripture, informed by the wisdom of others, so that we can look and say, God is equipping us for whatever is next in ministry. Yes.
I mean, God didn't, his sovereignty didn't change, right? I totally agree with everything that you're saying. In addition, right? I mean, what you said, I think, is completely spot on, that our heart for the mission didn't change. COVID didn't change my heart for the mission. It changed how I might approach that mission. But that's where I think we all need to stay, is that the mission has not changed
Right.
one bit.
Right.
The means by which I achieve that mission, well, that's up for grabs.
Right.
And it always
Right.
has been up for grabs.
Yeah.
Mhm. And I think children's ministry leaders are some of the most of ministry leaders, you are so creative as children's ministry leaders. If you're like, I have egg cartons and paper clips and tinfoil, go make something, right?
What can I do now? Yeah.
Right. What can I do now? So the creativity and the willingness to take risks in the community of children's ministry leaders is phenomenal. And there are lots of possibilities there.
Yes.
Amen.
Well, you three have inspired me. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with the community today. I appreciate each one of you. And honestly, one of the things that I just want to say is thank you for reminding us to go back to the mission and
Amen.
to go back to the why
Yeah.
and to take that time with the Lord. That's so, so important. I hope that inspired all of you today. So thank you guys. Appreciate
Amen.
you.
Thank you.
Kayla.